3 islands, 3 nights. Each one left me with the same terrible certainty. Isolation makes you small, and small things can find you. Content warning, this contains unsettling descriptions and themes that some listeners may find disturbing. These are true first-person accounts. I tell them as they were when I lived them. No definitive explanations, just what I saw, heard, and how it felt. If you enjoy real horror stories from forgotten places, consider subscribing. 1 click and you won't miss the next one. Story 1. The Cottage on the Main Shore. I went away to disappear. That was the plan anyway. My job had eaten my calendar and my sleep. Emails followed me into dreams. Meetings lived in the margins of my evenings. I'd booked the cottage because the listing promised 2 things: quiet and no cell reception. No reception meant no pings. No pings meant, at least to my frantic brain, the possibility of silence. It was on a small, low-lying island off the coast, part of a string of summer spots where fishermen kept boats and the tourists thinned by October. The owner's message was short. Rustic, bring a flashlight, lock the door at night. That was all. The ferry was a slab of cold morning and gull noise. I remember thinking the light on the water looked like flecks of silver dust. When I stepped off and onto the narrow dock, a blue motorboat rested nearby, tied to a cleat as if waiting. The man at the little harbour bar, a bartender who was friendly enough but not chatty, shrugged when I mentioned the boat later. "Plenty of folks come and go after dark," he said, polishing a pint glass. "You'll hear motors." I chalked that up to island economy and shrugged too. It felt okay to be naive then. The cottage was smaller than its photos. It sat close to the shore, clabbered, weathered to grey, and smelling faintly of mildew and salt. Inside, the walls were thin, so thin that I could hear the bathroom fan from next door, and later, how a single cough travelled like a neighbour's voice. The window over the small kitchen table had a curtain that let moonlight wash through it like a wet sheet. It was one of those places you could feel the structure of the house more than inhabit it. You were a guest in someone else's place rather than an owner of space. On the first evening, I unpacked a small bag, made bad coffee, and pushed a chair close to the window. The wind smelled like old seaweed and wood smoke. I had meant to read. Instead, I watched the horizon until the shapes of boats blurred into a smear and the sky went black. My phone confirmed what the listing had promised. No bars. I felt almost giddy with the privacy of it. I set my charger down, assuming I'd be fine. At about 10, I noticed my charger cable was warm when I touched it. The little LED on the wall adapter blinked and went out. By midnight, the battery was dead. I remember the sudden small panic, how the room seemed bigger without the blue light of my screen. I found the flashlight I had packed and kept it on the bedside table. It felt ritualistic. The beam was narrow and nervous when I used it, a band of white that revealed only what it passed over. I slept a little. I woke more. The house creaked as houses do, the kind of creak that sounds like someone shifting in another room. I told myself it was the wind, or the settling of old joints. Then I heard the scrape, not the random settling, but a rhythm like a shoe pulling over rough wood. It was slow, deliberate, close to the door. My first thought was the obvious and stupid one. Perhaps the owner or a neighbour had come by. Perhaps they'd misplaced a key. I gripped the flashlight and kept very still. The scrape stopped. A few heartbeats later, it started again. This time it ran along the base of the door, then across the floorboards near the wall. A shadow passed across the curtain from outside, thin at first, then whole. Then the porch light went dark. I pressed my back to the mattress and listened until the sound seemed like it was directly under me. I could hear breathing now, not mine. It was steady and close. Someone walking in circles, outside, around the cottage. I wrestled with ridiculous thoughts. A raccoon, a trick of wind. None felt convincing. The handle of the front door rattled. A small, familiar noise at first, like a polite knock done badly. Then the knob turned. Light pooled under the gap of the jamb from a torch outside, the sort of flashlight you see from a boat, bright and unblinking. My throat tightened. I heard a voice muffled by the door and the clapboard wall. "You in there?" it asked. It was not a shout. It was casual, like someone calling to a neighbor across a yard. I did not answer. The voice came again, this time softer, with an odd cadence that made the words sting. "I know you're in there, Leo." Hearing my name in a place where only a handful of people could know it, where the owner's message had not been signed with a name, where the bartender shrugged, felt like a door closing behind me. I didn't think. I moved like a thing on rails. The flashlight under the blanket, the hand steadying on the knob, the floorboard cool under my feet. I crept to the window. The curtain shivered with the beam that passed across it, and there at the edge of the light I saw a silhouette. Taller than a single person, should be standing on a low dock, hunched against the rain jacket he wore. The beam bobbed as if held by someone sitting in the dark, only the face turned slightly away, or masked by shadow. "You must have the wrong place," I said, and my voice came out small and wrong. The voice outside moved closer. Footsteps filled the porch like a clock striking wrong hours, soft, deliberate, then stopping to listen. Then a tapping, almost playful, on the glass. The beam slid across the window, and for a fraction of a second I thought I'd glimpsed more than a jacket. Something white, maybe the outline of a face, but no features distinct enough to hold. The beam cut away, and the air was a vacuum for a moment. Then the motor started, low and near, a cough in the dark. The sound of an engine reversing, shifting, and then moving off in a long, thin trail on the water. I forgot to breathe, until the sound dwindled to nothing, and the house held its breath with me. I sat down on the mattress, and uncurled like a person who had been pretending to be still, because pretending was safer than action. I told myself everything was normal. Someone had a boat. They would be on their way to another dock, perhaps. The island's geography made trespassers easy and anonymous, but a detail kept scraping at the back of my skull. The use of my name, the easy way the voice knew it. People on the island wouldn't know an email handle or a booking name without either being told or seeing me with it. I had not told the bartender my name. He only saw me once in passing. The owner had messaged me a single sentence and a note to lock the door. No signature. Who else knew I was staying here? I turned on every light I could find without caring about power. The beams threw the room into hard angles. I checked the locks twice. The deadbolt turned with a satisfying thunk. I felt like a child building a blanket fort, but the fort was made of screws and brass. I made coffee, the machine rattling like something alive in the morning, except it was close to 2 a.m. The kettle hissed, and the warmth of it felt obscene in that cold house. I told myself not to call anyone. I'd probably get a signal only outside the cottage. Instead, I sat and tried to reweave logic into the night, like a seamstress, rational reasons, plausible explanations, until dawn looked like a bright promise at the edge of the curtain. Morning found boot prints in the low sand near the dock. They ran from the water to the path by the cottage, and then a careful, measured line toward the neighbor's boathouse and back. The prints were fresh, pressed deep, like someone who had been moving with purpose and weight. They were not animal prints. They wore the shape of a heavy soul. I followed them with my eyes until they stopped at the water's edge. Someone had walked right up to the blue motorboat. The boat's cleat had a scuff. The knot was neat. I left then, not because I wanted to be brave, but because the house felt different with daylight. The walls seemed to have absorbed something of the night and turned it into a weight. I packed in a clumsy hurry, 2 shirts, a toothbrush, the flashlight, the sense that I was leaving a place where a stranger had called me by my name and had meant it. I didn't tell the bartender everything. I told him, truthfully, that I'd had a restless night and needed to head back to the mainland. He frowned when he saw the boot prints and said very little. He said, "People sometimes come by." And then, "Don't be out late next time." It sounded like an admonition and a dismissal at the same time. Back in the city, the absence of the sea was a new kind of noise. I kept thinking I could hear an engine leaving, just beyond the glass of my apartment window. I changed the password to my booking account. I called the owner to ask if they kept a guest book or a log, anything that might explain how someone could have known my name. But the owner's voice on the line was apologetic and then evasive. "We keep things simple," they said. "We don't track names." The local police listed the incident as a report. No charges filed, no evidence of forced entry, no CCTV to check the dock. They suggested it might have been a prank. The idea of a prank did not fit the texture of that voice. The way it used my name felt intimate in a way a prankster would not achieve by asking around. I replayed the night in my head until the edges blurred, the scrape of rubber on planks, the whisper of the beam, the knock, and the way the motor left without fanfare. My mind kept returning to the thought that terrified me more than anything else. If someone could find me on that island easily, if they could approach by boat, call my name through the wall, then it meant my choice to hide there had been understood as an opportunity, not a refuge. I don't know whether the person on the dock ever meant me harm. I have theories. Fishermen who keep an eye on who shows up at odd hours, a local who reads rental notifications, someone who'd been watching the house for reasons unrelated to me. I have no proof of anything supernatural, but proof is not the point. The point is how small I felt when I realized anonymity was an illusion. The point is how easily the night bent around someone stepping in and leaving without explanation. That first story stuck with me for weeks, and then months. My dreams were simpler. Engines, soft knocks, someone whispering an old email signature as if it were a prayer. I quit the job that pushed me there. I stopped staying in houses that weren't mine. I began to watch my blinds at night with a vigilance that made me tired. If that was where my sense of being watched began, it was nothing compared to what would follow. If you think the first one was strange, wait until you hear what happened on the next island. Don't try this. These places are often unsafe and many are off limits. Curiosity is natural. Recklessness is not. Story 2. Hashima. The island that should be empty. I was supposed to be there for work. My credentials were a stack of credentials, a university ID, a letter from the engineering department, and a permit stamped by someone who wore a suit in Tokyo and, I assumed, kept tidy records. Hashima had been a footnote in my lectures, an industrial ruin that climbed out of the sea like some dark tooth, abandoned when the mine closed and the people left. In photographs, it looked like a diorama of decay, concrete carcasses, rusted balconies, windows like hollow eyes. It was exactly the kind of place where history eats itself and leaves empty shells. I flew halfway around the world with a small team and a guide named Tishi. She was precise, her hair pulled back, an authoritative voice that left no room for hesitation. We boarded the charter early and cut across a grey sea. The island lay like a scab on the horizon, closer and then closer until its edges resolved into rows of tightly packed blocks. The permit came with rules. Stick to the route, wear a hard hat, follow the guide, don't stray. That last one sounded like a cliché, uttered to make liability lawyers feel better, but on Hashima, the rule was practical. The island had been left in a hurry, the floors had rotted unevenly, and entire stairwells disappeared into darkness where the concrete had given way. Tishi insisted on radios for everyone, a whisper between us and the team leader on the returning boat. We nodded through the orientation, the way you do when you think you understand the danger because you're told about it. We walked into the teeth of the place, feeling professional and almost reverent. The first oddness came in the way the dust moved. It wasn't just that the floors were coated in the same grey hush you expect from abandoned spaces. There were tracks in it. No, paths, like grooves cut along hallways, as if someone had dragged the same pattern along the powder. They led away from the main thoroughfares, down narrow corridors, toward rooms that should have been empty. At first I thought maintenance people came back sometimes, perhaps relic hunters, but each path was neat, a repeated habit, not the chaotic prints of a one-off visit. We entered a building that once housed families. Broken toys, shards of glass, rusted beds leaned at angles like bones. The air tasted metallic, like old pennies, and there was a smell that belonged to living things, not mold or rot, but a faint, stubborn warmth that suggested recent presence. I pressed my hand to a wall, and it was warmer than the air should have allowed. There was dampness at the baseboards, like someone had been breathing there. Tishi never slowed, but her tone when she spoke into the radio tightened. "Keep moving," she said. She did not look back. That was the first time I noticed how her eyes slid past the doorways, as if measuring them. We moved in a line, helmets bobbing under broken skylights, radios crackling static. One of our team shone a light into a small room and found blankets folded, a couple of plastic bottles, and a jumble of what might have been a makeshift kitchen. The sight felt like stepping on the edge of someone's private life. Someone had left in a hurry, or someone had stayed. "Shouldn't be anyone here," someone muttered. The radio chirped, and Tishi answered curtly that the permit allowed only research and the facilities were under protection. She asked us not to take photos of certain sections. The guides on these trips become gatekeepers, keepers of what's allowed and what isn't. You obey them because you want to believe rules will keep you safe. I kept thinking about the warmth of that wall, the way it contradictorily suggested both recent movement and secrecy. As we turned a corner, a thin radio message crackled and then stopped, like someone interrupted mid-sentence. I replayed the snippet later in my head, an unintelligible syllable, and the static that followed felt like teeth grinding. At one point, a stairwell we had marked on the plans as passable was choked with rubble. Concrete chunks blocked the descent deliberately, not as the result of decay, but like a bar being placed to keep the stairs from passing. Someone had moved that rubble. There was heavy foot traffic on the landing above it, heavy shoe prints. They did not belong to us. I will admit, in that moment, a part of me thought about leaving the permitted route. Not because I hunted danger, but because a journalist's curiosity is a stubborn thing. We had permits, we had credentials. What would a few steps off the path matter? I thought about the photographs that would mean the paper I could write. Someone had been living here, and that fact needed recording. But everyone on our team moved with ingrained caution. That voice of reason comes from the training to respect the unknown. Tishi was rigid as she called us back. "Not allowed," she said. "We stick together." We continued, but then the radios started picking up voices that weren't part of our team. At first it was a murmur, human, and then muffled, like someone speaking through a thin wall. It sounded like laughter or prayer, depending on how you listened. It followed us in a pattern. We would hear it on the far hallways, then close, then on the stairwells that led away from our path, like someone pacing and choosing to stay just out of sight. When we reached what had been the communal laundry, the air carried cigarette smoke and a sweet chemical scent I could not place. It hung in the hallway like a memory. Tishi's jaw tightened. She checked her radio and then looked at Dr. Yamamoto's team leader, the one we were supposed to report findings to, and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of the head. He spoke in low tones in Japanese. I did not understand the words, but I felt the message. This is not accounted for. Then I found something that the photos don't capture, the human scale of survival on an island that was meant to be empty. In a small room sealed by a buckled door, I saw a pile of clothing folded carefully, a plastic basin with water, a couple of empty bottles lined up like sentries. On a shelf, someone had left a toothbrush and a candle stub. The toothbrush was not brittle. The bristles still had a softness that suggested recent use. It was the most stupidly ordinary thing. It felt like proof that life had been threaded through the ruins like a secret cord. Someone had been here, and not long ago. I didn't feel immediate danger so much as the hum of being observed by a place that was supposed to be dead. There was a moral itch, the journalist's question. Who are they? Are they clandestine residents hiding from authorities? Are they squatters eking out a space on concrete bones? Or were they something else, people living in margins and choosing to remain ghost-like? The guide's radio scrambled suddenly. The voice on the other end said a single sentence in English, "Leave now." It was not one of ours. The tone was rough, urgent, and utterly certain. The message triggered the kind of panic that arrives like a sound in your chest. You don't process it. Your body becomes a reaction. Tishi barked orders, the way a conductor does when a stage collapses. "Go! Now!" We ran through the corridors, and the echo of our footsteps multiplied. 10 pairs, 20, a stampede in a house of bones. At the doorway we found the stairwell blocked, not by rubble, but with something placed methodically, chairs, an old wardrobe, concrete blocks jammed to slow descent. Someone had intended to make the exit difficult. Someone had meant to control who could leave. As we backed away, a sound followed us. Not far, not loud, but an audible footfall in the building behind. 1, 2, 3. Heavy steps behind a wall, then a slow, deliberate tapping, as if a person were measuring our exit with a knuckle on wood. A hush fell like a sheet, and our radios stuttered. We made it to the boat in a fashion that felt more like fleeing than a planned retreat. Tishi sat forward with her hands white on the railing, and the water seemed to applaud our departure with cold slaps against the hull. On the return trip, the wind seemed to talk to us in sibilant hisses, and the people who had been on the island resumed their former human shapes, as if stepping back into themselves off stage. Later, back at the hotel, when I asked Dr. Yamamoto about the toothbrush and the smoke and the closed stairs, his face closed. "We have reports of people finding signs," he said, "but nothing we can confirm." He told me not to publish anything that might encourage curiosity or sensationalism. He told me it could harm the locals and disturb delicate bureaucratic negotiations. The thing that stayed with me was small and intimate. The toothbrush, the candle stub, the cigarette smell, the way the steps had been blocked. These were not random traces. They were choices. Someone had chosen both to remain and to discourage discovery. Why? Was it survival, protection, a claim to something that had been taken? Or were there less charitable reasons, a desire to control who could see what lived inside the ruins? I tried to contact our facilitator after I got back home. I sent emails with carefully worded questions, and one day there was a short response from an administrative address. "We have no comment." Attempts to reach Dr. Yamamoto directly failed. The telephones led to voicemail. When bureaucracies close ranks, the sound they make is silence. The memory of Hashima sat in me like a splinter. It lodged under a fingernail and throbbed every time I thought about the idea that a place built to hold workers could still, decades later, hold people who insisted on their right to be there, or who were forced into hiding and learned to live inside the shadows of concrete. I kept thinking about the way the stairwell was blocked, not a collapse, but an intentional barricade, and how that suggested the presence of someone protective or someone who needed to keep others out. I can't say I felt hunted on Hashima. I felt intruded upon into the lives of those who might have been clumsy and secretive survivors. But the moment we were told to leave by a voice that was not ours, and then found the exit impeded, the island stopped being an object of study and became a place with agency. It kept some of its hold, even when the boat cut away from the harbour and the island shrank behind us like a thing refusing to be seen. We published a technical paper about structural decay and the ethics of heritage tourism. We omitted the story about the toothbrush. Part of me still thinks about the lives threaded through the place. Part of me wishes we had forced the bureaucrat's hand and marshaled resources to find whoever was living there, if they could be found without harming them. But I know better now. Some stories are not for us to fix. Some edges need to be respected because the cost of revealing is too high. The nights after Hashima, I woke sweating, not from fear of being found, but from the realization that we had almost walked into someone else's carefully arranged existence. I had thought of islands as empty, as experiments in solitude and ruin. Hashima taught me that emptiness is a fragile concept. It can disguise the lives of those who have learned to exist inside the forgetting. If the cottage on the main shore felt like a stranger knocking on a door, Hashima felt like a message left under the doormat. Personal, deliberate, and unreadable. If you thought that one changed how I view abandoned places, you should hear about what happened on North Brother. End of this segment. Story 3, North Brother Island. The voice that wasn't my thesis was supposed to be an exercise in distance. I was 23, convinced that proximity yielded insight. I wanted photographs of decay, notes on neglect, a chapter about institutional abandonment and how spaces keep the echoes of people who were pushed out. I found an online forum where a few hardened urban explorers traded maps in whispers. One of them mentioned North Brother and a small illegal launch at the dark edge of a river. It sounded like the kind of thing you do when you have too much conviction and not enough caution. Jansen and Jesse came because they liked being known as the people who went. Jansen was steady, the kind of friend whose hands never trembled while he untied knots. Jesse was loud in a way that filled shadows. He kept laughing to drown out the nerves. We rented a single beat-up kayak between the three of us and left at 2 a.m., a tide that would take us close and then leave us to a short paddle. The city slept, and the river smelled of oil and algae. Streetlights lowered themselves into watery ovals. On the water the world compresses, sounds become small, everything looks nearer. It makes you feel both brave and exposed in equal measure. We landed on a strip of riverbank reclaimed by reeds. The moon was a thin coin. The island rose up like a dark rumour, trees and mortar, vines clasping iron. From a distance it looked like a ruined ship wedged into the river. We left the kayak tied and moved in a line, our headlamps slicing through curtains of cobweb and moth wings. The hospital sat at the island's heart, like a jaw. The doors were broken and the windows were teeth. Inside, light pooled in strange rectangles, and the air smelled of old antiseptic and the sweet, stale breath of rot. The place had the hush of a place that had been forced into silence. Everything made sound a little thin, our footsteps on tile, the drag of a bag, the metallic ring when you nudged a trolley. We joked to keep the sound level down, to make the fear less obvious. We were professionals in our own adrenaline. We split up the way amateur explorers do, practical but reckless. Jansen wanted to catalogue room after room. Jesse flirted with danger by trying doors that still hung on one hinge. I had my camera and a notepad, and a thesis deadline burning like a light behind my forehead. We agreed on a meeting point, the main atrium that looked like a sunken church. We carried small radios, because radios make you feel official. We took all the sensible precautions of people who enjoy ignoring them. At first, it was exactly like the photos. Rot, peeling tiles, rust, the occasional pillow mummified in dust. The hospital's history seemed layered into the walls, outsized lockers where uniforms had been stored, a row of tiny shoes in a forgotten locker, paperwork brittle as onion skin. There were graffiti ghosts, names sprayed in angry abbreviations, a heart or two, a child's drawing of a sun. Time had been patient here. Then the noises started, not the sudden, simple clatter of something falling, but voices, faint at first, as if coming from the building's throat rather than a mouth. A woman's low moan, long, like an old radio warbling between stations, slid between the floors. It could have been wind. It could have been a gull. It could have been anything. But Jesse stiffened. He lifted his lamp and scanned a corridor where the light pooled into infinity. He laughed when he saw nothing. His laugh did not reach his eyes. We kept moving. The atrium felt more like a rendezvous of time than of people. There were wheelchairs abandoned in odd alignments, like a chorus frozen mid-motion. A gurney sat at an angle, its metal frame catching what little moonlight found the interior. I remember thinking how ordinary those objects were, tools of care, now monuments to absence. I was ahead of them when I heard my name. Not shouted, not called across a room, but spoken like someone stepping out from behind a pillar of shadow. "Hey, are you coming?" Jesse's voice, light and familiar and ridiculous. I turned. No one. The corridor ahead was unbroken, the doorway empty. My radio was silent. I walked toward the sound because I wanted the sound to make sense. The beam of my headlamp moved across tiles, across flaked paint, and then hit a shape so impossibly tall it made the light stutter. At first I thought it was scaffolding or a collapsed sign. Then it turned. It wasn't a person in a coat. It was a figure in a doorway, too high for a human, the shoulders at an angle that made the collarbone seem a ledge. It stood facing the wall, hands at its sides, like a sentry facing a painting. The light showed nothing of its face. The thing was long-limbed and narrow, as if perspective had been given a cruelty. From the knees up there was enough shape to tell me it had been built to stand upright. From the distance it should have been a silhouette. Up close, it read like an optical lie. I felt a cold that was not from the night wind. It was a recoil from physics doing something unfamiliar. A sound moved behind me, the laughter that always precedes a bad decision. Jesse called again. "Don't be weird, man. Come on." His voice sounded guttural on the tape in my head now. Too near, too casual for where he'd been 20 seconds before. Then the mimicry began. The figure turned slightly. It didn't move like a person, so much as it reoriented the shadow in a way that suggested attention. The figure's head, if you could call it that, tilted, and from its direction came the sound of Jesse's voice saying my name. "Leo? You coming?" It was Jesse's voice, clean and patient. I swear, it was Jesse's voice. I could have reached out and touched it and drawn back a hand with the certainty that my palm had brushed the inside of a friend's laugh. It had the same cadence, the same half-smile that Jesse carried, but when I spun, my body clumsy and stupid with momentum, Jesse was not there. He was below, by the old nurse's station, fiddling with a loose tile with his lamp aimed down. Jansen called from a stairwell that he'd found a whiteboard with names. Jesse was laughing now, but not the laugh that had stepped out from the doorway. That voice was still patient and waiting, as if Jesse had left an echo to beckon me. I called out, "Jesse!" My voice came out thin. The voice answered with the same softness. "Come on, Leo, don't be an idiot. It's this way." The thing used his intonation with such accuracy my muscles should have relaxed. The small, stupid part of my brain wanted to believe it. There is a terrible human tendency to follow what we think we know. I took 3 steps towards the doorway, and then I heard Jansen shout, not a call, but a sound that had the weight of alarm. "Leo, don't!" He was closer, his breath ragged. I turned, and his face looked blanked with terror. The radio clipped a syllable, and then the static ate it. The figure in the doorway had shifted to a different pose, and the voice calling me was now not quite Jesse's, but a near mirror, like wax pressed into a face. The contours right enough to fool, but wrong enough to leave a memory of inconsistency. The syllables landed in my chest like pebbles. At that instant the old woman's moan swelled. It layered with the voice that had called me. The moan rose from somewhere above us and below us at once, like the building exhaling, like pipes remembering the shape of bodies. It was not language, it was a pressure that pushed the sound into meaning, the kind of noise that makes you think of hospital rooms and late-night visitors. It was a sound that has nothing to do with mirth. We ran. Not a measured retreat, but instead 3 people colliding with each other's fear, Our lamps bobbed like frantic fireflies. We tore through a corridor that seemed suddenly new, walls closer, doorways gouging at our shoulders. The sound that had called my name followed in its own way, not as a voice, but as an impression, a pressure that suggested we should stop. Someone, or something, rearranged the echoes to delay us. At the stairs, I thought I saw the tall figure step across the doorway, with a slow, deliberate gait that made no sense. It could have been my headlamp catching an angle of insulation. It could have been an optical trick. It could not have been. The hair on my arms stood at the thought. We reached the shoreline in a blur, lungs burning, hearts near leaving their chests. The kayak swung in the current, patient and indifferent. We shoved off. Jesse laughed, the sound brittle, and said, "Okay, that was intense." He tried to brush it off. Jansen held the paddle so tight his knuckles were white. My hands shook with the habit of someone who has learned to translate fear into movement. From the water, the island looked the way islands do. Smaller, flat, the details eaten by night. We paddled hard. Behind us, a sound travelled, a hollow, long note that could have been an engine, could have been wind on broken glass, could have been the moan dragged through pipes. It sounded like something telling us to leave, and also like something stretched over a mouth and being laughed at. When we reached the city, reality reassembled in comforting patterns. The familiar lights, the smell of greasy takeout, a man who asked if we were okay. We nodded. Jesse offered to buy everyone a beer. We argued about calling the police. We didn't, which is typical. You don't call in the middle of absurdity because absurdity requires a witness that isn't you. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of it with everything a rational mind can call in. Someone playing a trick with a recorder, a local homeless person with an unusual height and a talent for mimicry, ventriloquism, a set of speakers hidden to freak out trespassers, acoustic quirks of a building that allow distant voices to shift direction, and timber. Each had its merits and holes. Mimicry can be learned. Ventriloquists can be brilliant liars of sound. Speakers can be hidden. A human being could be tall and weirdly proportioned. None of those explanations fit the feel of that figure turned to the wall like a sentry, the way its presence seemed to manipulate the building's own memory. Jesse insisted it was a prank. He said someone from the forum had followed and wanted to prove bravery. He wanted to laugh the whole thing off. Jansen, for a while, didn't want to talk about it. He started sleeping with the lights on for a month. I stopped going near rivers after dark. The most unsettling part wasn't the tall figure in a doorway or the old woman's moan. It was the moment of being called by a voice I trusted, and then discovering that voice in my city weeks later, on a bus, on a late-night bar's break-room radio, thin and wrong, and calling a name I hadn't said aloud. I heard Jesse's voice in places it could not have been. I read articles about acoustic phenomena that make you think maybe the brain wraps a familiar pattern around random noise. That is possible, but predictive patterning and the sensation of being actively imitated are different things. I could not get past the sense that whatever we heard understood not only how Jesse sounded, but what cadence would make me step forward. I never went back. The thesis was finished without a second trip. The photographs I used were distant shots, grainy and suitably academic. I don't know whether something on North Brother wanted to study the way we move through abandoned care, or whether we were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. What I do know is that a voice can be a weapon. It can be a lure. It can be used to coax someone out of place, and something on that island, whether human, trick, or otherwise, used that weapon very well. Aftermath and the shape of doubt. Each story left its own residue. The cottage left me nervous in the small hours. Hashima left me with a moral ache and the image of a toothbrush on a shelf. North Brother left me with the dread that familiarity could be faked. They all share a mechanism, approach by water. Boats, tides, midnight paddles. The water makes the approach easy and the escape quiet. Water hides feet. It allows someone to arrive where the land cannot see them coming. It makes islands into places that can be entered without the predictable rituals of arrival on a road. You are always a guest when you come by sea, and guests can be unannounced. They also share a subtler theme, the infringement of identity. On the main shore, my name was spoken through clapboard. On Hashima, someone lived in an island that was supposed to be empty, arranging their life into the margins where they could be both present and unseen. On North Brother, my friend's voice, someone I trusted, became a lure. Identity, in each case, was used as a tool to bypass distance, to ease entry, to make the other feel small and exposed. What do I believe? I believe what I lived, the scrape and the knock, the warmth of a wall that inhaled, the voice that sounded like a friend. I do not believe I saw ghosts in the theatrical sense. I do not insist these are supernatural events. There are many human explanations that could fit. People hide, people imitate, people claim spaces to survive, people are inventive when they want you away. Technology can mimic a tone. Acoustics can steal a voice and bend it into a corridor to call your name. But there is also the stubborn fact of my experience. It happened. The not knowing is the hardest part. The possibilities, prank, local knowledge, something else, tangle in ways that make certainty impossible. I prefer uncertainty to neat answers, because certainty would demand that I choose between explanations that don't quite fit. And then there are the small consequences that don't make themselves into claims, but echo like a dropped coin, nights interrupted by the echo of a motor, a sudden prick of nerves when someone calls out a name on a busy street, the way my hands know to check locks now, even when I'm told there is nothing to fear. Those little habits are the record of what violence, or the memory of violence, does to a person. It is not always physical. More often, it is the rearrangement of how we pass sound, shadow, and intent. I tried writing about all this in sober academic language. I sat at desks and tried to translate hunger into footnotes. It was easier to be clinical than to tell the part where I stayed awake and listened for a boat that never came. The clinical sentences lack the shiver that comes when you remember a name whispered under breath through clapboard. That is why I keep telling the stories in first person. The first-person clause is messy and honest. It doesn't pretend to be proof. It says, this is what this did to me. Is there any lesson? Perhaps two. 1. Islands are thresholds, not only in the architectural sense, but in the human one. They are places where jurisdiction thins, and the laws that normally keep us apart can be bent or ignored. 2. Anonymity is fragile. Wherever you go to hide, someone else can find you if they know where to look or how to call you back into the open. Final image. The three places, Maine, Hashima, North Brother, keep folding into each other in my memory. I can smell the seaweed and the institutional bleach at the same time. I can hear the motor leaving one night and the mimicry following me the next. That last sound is the one I cannot silence, a voice, patient and warm, saying a name. Once it unfurled in my ear in a house on a Maine shore. Once it sang in the halls of a hospital ruin. Once it was an echo on the water, as we left behind a land that didn't quite look like it wanted to be seen. I don't know what any of those things were in the end. I don't know whether you can call them hauntings or the cleverness of human beings who learn to bend language like wire. I do know this. Islands have a way of collecting things. Boats, people, secrets, and sometimes those things choose how they are revealed. They come by water. They find the soft places. So if you have an island story, something you heard in the dark, a motor you couldn't place, a voice that shouldn't have been there, share it below. Tell me what you think. Skeptics and believers both are welcome. If this stuck to your bones, subscribe for more true accounts from forgotten places. These are real stories that stay with you, and sometimes that's worse than any explanation. 3 islands, 3 nights. Each left me unable to sleep with absolute certainty. The certainty I have now is a small one. Names can be spoken to draw you out, and sometimes you will answer them just to see who waits on the other side.